Welcome back to Poplar Preparedness. So glad you're joining us again. And I have a special guest here today, Sarah. She spent some time in Lebanon recently, and she also was working with Syrian refugees in Lebanon, as well as being in Beirut. So welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Now, you were there doing missions and ministry work.
Yes.
And you got to talk with some of the folks there in Beirut, and then it sounded like most of your energy and most of your interactions were with the Syrian refugees. Is that right?
Yes, that is correct. We did most of our work with the Syrians.
Okay. And it was just a real terrible situation for them that they left Syria, one really bad situation, and ended up in another really bad situation in Lebanon. As if most of you know about the rampant inflation that's been happening in Lebanon, and then of course in Beirut, there was the harbor blast that happened. Now you just shared with me two stories. If you could just share one of those stories about people in the blast in Lebanon.
Yes. One of the cool things is that we got to hear firsthand accounts of how God had really protected people there during the blast. As tragic as it was, there were still beautiful moments. There was an elderly man who was telling us he sits in his favorite armchair every day in the same room and he stares out his window. That has been his routine for years. Well, this day as he was sitting there, he heard a voice behind him telling him to get up and move. And he lives all alone, so he was a little unsure about what was going on, so he just, figured it was a voice in his head, just kept sitting there. Well, he heard it a second time very clearly and very urgently to get up and move. And it was so strong that he got up and moved, if nothing else than to see who was in the house with him. Well, right after he did that, the explosion went off, and he was launched into the air. He hit his head on the ceiling and landed on the other side of the room. Miraculously, he was unharmed, but he looked, and if he had been sitting in that chair when that blast went off and had been rocketed into the ceiling there, the light fixture had a long spike that came out the bottom of it, and he would have been impaled in his head. And he says from that moment on, he knew it must have been Jesus talking to him, and he became saved. A second story we heard was from a young gentleman. He and his 4 pals met down at the docks every day. The docks are where the blast went off. They would meet there every day to hang out. They'd been doing this for 4 years, never missed a day. Well, that day he got held up, and right about that time, then the blast went off, and everyone else perished but him. And as far as he knows, he was the only believer in that group. And he says he doesn't know why God saved him, but he knows it's for a purpose, and so now he tries to share with people about what God has done for him.
Yeah, absolutely. And so now you were telling me a little bit about how even though they have just a very, very strong family and community network, yet you're telling me that most people had a common complaint.
Yes, they feel very alone, a lot of them, especially in the Muslim families, because it is just not a very emotionally supportive religion, I would say. To show weakness of any type is very frowned upon and very shamed, and being that it's a shame-honor culture, you avoid shame at all costs. So we were very often the only people they could talk to who were not going to shame them or look down upon them for having struggles. So we were able to be there emotionally for them a lot of times, because even though they love their family dearly, oftentimes there was even shame from within their own family. So there just wasn't a very strong network or community. But on the flip side, in churches, one of the things that was so beautiful is that they would support each other. And that was something that really would get their attention there, the fact that there were people there who were seeing each other, making mistakes, but loving them anyways.
There's a relatively large population of Christians in Beirut particularly, and so unlike a lot of other places in the Muslim world, so you see that kind of dynamic of different communities living in the same city. Now, you were sharing before about how this whole inflation situation has really forced people to have to do things that they really would prefer not to, like you were telling me about how people the men are basically having to work all the time to keep up with inflation, particularly the Syrian refugees, and even that some of them are having to dig through trash to find food, and buying up pretty much anything that's not nailed down when it comes to that. So as that inflation just happens, it's just interesting to see how the society that sort of was functioning before, starting to break down even more. And that's just an important insight I gathered from you about that. And just the need for outside people to be able to talk to when you're in a family situation where it's just everyone's not getting along, or there's just a lot of stress being put on people. Now that's not just a Muslim thing, of course. That's people under stress,
Yes.
put other people under stress. And with the stores being empty, now you were saying about how the gasoline was rationed in there, and about the power.
Yes, the power was government regulated, so there are certain hours of the day where you'd be on government power, and then it would just flip off. And if you had a generator, good. And if not, you just had to wait, and it could go like that. I tried to time it to figure it out, so I could be like, okay, when am I gonna have the hot water for the shower? But there was really no way to predict when it was gonna go off or on. And also, yes, lines for the gas stations would be miles long, because you could only get gas at certain times and only certain amounts. And so you think gas lines here are bad, you don't know anything about bad gas lines. So it's just a whole lot of unrest. They don't know what's gonna happen next every day. It's like another straw being placed on the camel's back, and it just keeps getting worse and worse for them. And that's one thing they're all saying is, I don't know how we're gonna get through this.
A lot of loneliness and a lot of fear, it sounds like.
Oh, yeah.
So now we're going to have another interview and a number of other videos from Sarah up on my other channel, iMissions. So if you just click on the box right up here, and you can go straight to the next video over on the other channel and check out there. We'll be talking a little more overtly about your ministry work and some of the stories about the people you got to talk to over there, and some of the interactions with teammates while working in that context. All right, everyone, God bless you. Steve Poplar out.